Hello there, welcome to Inkquiring Minds. My name is Doug and I'm back with another Pen Resurrection Sunday video. Today I've got a really nice vintage pen to restore. If you've been watching my channel, you'll know that I'm really fond of Parker Vacumatics, but I'm really fond of the first generation of Parker Vacumatics. And this is one right here. I bought this several weeks ago and I've resisted the urge to try to open it up and inspect it and to do stuff to it because I want to film all of that, of course. And so I put it away in my storage until I could get to it today. I mentioned this was the first generation of Vacumatic. The Vacumatic came out around 1933, was named the vacuum filler at first until they in 1933 changed the name to Vacumatic. And the first generation were lockdown fillers. And they continued to make the lockdown filler until about 1937. And then from 1937 to 1939, they changed the lockdown filler. Here it is here. It turns and extends an aluminum tube, and then you pump up ink and then turn it again and it locks in place. Well, they changed that so that it doesn't lock down anymore. It's just a tube, and they extended the length of the blind cap to surround that. They were called speedline fillers. That was generation 2. That lasted until 1942. And then in 1942, of course, the U.S. was fully engaged in World War II, and they needed the metal for the war effort. They replaced most of the filler materials with celluloid plastic and rounded the blind cap off, and that was the generation 3. And here is a Gen 3 Parker Vacumatic, this one from 1945. And you can see that the filler, well, this is a modern filler, it's all brass, but in the third generation, this was all celluloid right here on that rod. And they had rounded blind caps. These first generation lockdown fillers are very highly sought after, and this one is a top of the line. There was a top line and a bottom line. The 3 cap rings indicates that this is the top of the line from 1937. There's an imprint right here that says 1/7, which is the first quarter of 1937, and it says 4/6, which would be the fourth quarter of 1936 when the nib was made. So these are the pens that I covet the most when I see them on eBay. They are not restored. They have gouges out of them. The seller says they don't know whether it works or not. He dip tested this and said the nib works okay, and the lockdown filler moves, but it doesn't drop any ink. So that means that that diaphragm on the inside is all dried up and desiccated or completely absent. So this is the first time that I've looked at this pen, so let's take a look and see what it needs. The top finial has the wide, large black jewel. There's a bit of a gouge out of that. We'll have to see whether that will unscrew and allow the clip to come loose. The cap is in good shape. There's a gouge there. Lots of wear marks for its 88 years on the planet. And when we look at the nib, it's not heavily tarnished, but it's two-tone. And it looks like some of that platinum plating has come off. The two-tone has the gold of the arrow down the center, and then the silver look is platinum mask that is laid over top. And part of that mask is gone over here. So I expect polishing might take the rest of that platinum off of there and make the pen all gold. I don't know. We'll have to find out. The ebonite feed looks like it's in good shape. It looks like the nib's a little deep, or the feed is a little proud and it's off center a little bit. So that needs to be knocked out. Of course, the section is very tightly in place. Lots of wear marks from the cap right there on the barrel. A good deep imprint. GOS Parker, Parker Vacumatic, made in the USA. And the end jewel looks like it's in good shape. And that ring has some tarnish to it, but should polish up nicely. All of the gold on these pens was gold filled. Very sturdy and polishes up beautifully. And this barrel should be translucent. I can see some translucency through it, but it's just caked with ink, of course. And the lockdown filler looks like it's in really good shape. I've seen these that are highly corroded, and this little bayonet in here is all torn up and doesn't work properly. I've repaired a few of these, but that lockdown filler works nicely. So aluminum shaft on that and a brass button on the very top. So the first thing we want to do with this pen is put it in the ultrasonic bath of pen flush, which is 9 parts distilled water and 1 part ammonia, and let it agitate in the ultrasonic bath for a few minutes to dislodge any old ink and get it flowing. And there will be lots of old ink inside that cap. But no splits in the celluloid, no cracks, everything fits nicely. The nib looks like it might just need a little bit of alignment, just a little tiny bit of alignment there. In fact, I think I'll get my digital microscope out and take a look at that nib under the microscope, and let's see what it looks like. Turn on the microscope here and see what we can see. So there we go. Yeah, it looks like it needs a little bit of adjustment. Look here at the top. Yeah, it might need some polishing and adjustment, but lots of good tipping material there. There you can see that that edge is bare on the inside edge there, so those tines need to be aligned, and then probably the tipping material needs to be polished on the bottom. Now here we are out of the bath. There was a lot of ink, especially inside this cap. A lot of ink still in there, so I'll let that soak some more. But the gold hardware is already starting to look a little brighter, and there's a lot of ink left in this pen. So the first thing I want to try to do is to get that section off so we can get that nib and feed out of there. We try a little gripper material first, see whether we can give it a turn. And it come loose. Okay. If I don't have to use heat, I won't use heat. That's still got a lot of old cruddy ink. But there we go with our long breather tube. And that's going to go back in the bath. See whether the breather tube will come out by itself. Yep. So all these pieces will go back in. Now that we can get to the barrel and get it and flush out as much of that old ink as possible. Okay, so I've gotten a lot of ink out of this section and nib and breather tube, and a ton of ink and parts of the old diaphragm out of that barrel. Might be able to see it working. We get out our inspection camera here and go down inside the barrel and push the lockdown filler up and down, and we can see it working. So that video shows that that diaphragm is completely gone, and just remnants remaining, but that piston moves up and down, and I need to get this vac pump out of there. We'll leave that till later because I want to get that nib and feed out of that section. So we'll put it in my knockout block, get out the rod, and give it a shot. No, it does not want to budge. So I'm just going to put that back in the bath again and see whether I can loosen up some more of that old ink in there, because I don't want to split that ebonite. Now I had to soak it a couple of times and hammer it pretty hard to get that feed out of there. And there's a lot of old ink there. And there's our nib with the 46 stamped into it. And yeah, that plating is gone. Mostly on the one side. That platinum plating seems to have disappeared. But I'll let all this stuff soak some more now that it's free. Feed looks pretty good. We'll polish that up on the visible side. And the section has no marks on it whatsoever, so that ebonite is almost perfect. So that'll take a polish as well. Still has a lot of old ink in it. So back in the bath with you. So I got out my Parker Vac extractor from the inking nib and screwed it on the barrel and tightened it down. And I've added a little bit of heat just around the base of the barrel there, like that. And it has budged, and it is unscrewing. I'm doing it slowly. We don't want that celluloid to break or crack, but it's coming out very nicely. Some of these have given me fits for days. And there we go. So now we have to get it the rest of the way out. So I'm going to unscrew it from the vac extractor, and we'll use one of our push rods to push the rest of the piston through. Very gently, I don't want to break that ebonite cup. It's crunchy. Yeah, it's not wanting to budge, so I'm going to soak it a bit more and see whether it'll come free without much force. In the meantime, while that's soaking, I'm going to use some metal polish on this nib and a cotton swab and see how much gold we can brighten up. Yeah, it's looking pretty good. And I bet it might have been wrong about that platinum. It might just have been, well, no, it's fading a bit. But I'll put this on my buffer wheel and we'll buff it up shiny like new. So what was a tarnished old 88-year-old two-toned Parker Vacumatic nib is now a almost brand new gold Parker Vacumatic nib. Look at that. Just beautiful. The nib's going to need some adjusting, but I think that's a pretty good job. My own self. Well, that took a lot of cajoling. I had to apply some heat. I soaked it for about 10 minutes, and then I had to apply some heat to that, and then put the rod down inside and give it a slight tap. Didn't want to split that celluloid right at this end. And there's the remnants of the diaphragm inside there with the pellet inside that aluminum receptacle. They replaced these aluminum receptacles with ebonite in 1942, but that's all aluminum there. It looks in really good shape. This whole mechanism is in really good shape. So I'll make sure all the remnants of that old diaphragm are out of the barrel, and we can now see how nicely translucent that barrel is. It was just caked up with ink. There's some remnants of that diaphragm right there. But this will all go back in the pen flush ultrasonic bath again to get it absolutely pristine and clean and get all those remnants of old latex out of there. Make sure those threads are all nice and clean as well so that the pump can go back in. I'm going to use my Dremel tool to drill out that pellet. I have these tiny drill bits on my Dremel tool, and hold everything still and just drill that pellet out and get the remnants of it out of there. And I'll dig the rest of it out with my dental tools. And there's the little pellet, and the receptacle looks really good. So I'm taking these test tube cleaning brushes, they're plastic, and running some pen flush through the barrel and scrubbing it from the inside. Then I'll go back in the bath and we'll be ready to put the new diaphragm in the vac pump and put this back together again. In the meantime, I'm going to see whether this top jewel might come out to release that clip so I can polish the barrel easily and polish the clip separately. And a little gripper material and a pencil inside the cap. Give it a good push and see whether it'll turn. And I believe it is coming loose. Yes. Yep, there we go. So there's the top jewel and the clip, and there's the cap free. So we can polish that up. We can polish this bit separately. These are the wider ones. They got narrower as the Vacumatic evolved, and they got even narrower on the Parker 51. And there's two parts to this. We'll see whether we can separate this. Maybe I'll put that in the pen flush for a while. But there's the brass nut that goes on the inside and the plastic top finial that screws into the brass nut. And that has, the brass has a slot in it, so we can use a slot screwdriver to tighten that clip down properly. But there's the clip beforehand, and hopefully it'll polish up and we'll see it over here after. And here is the clip after some polishing on my buffing wheel and on my polishing cloth. And please don't send me email about my dirty fingernails. You try to polish gold for an hour and see how clean your nails are. I think that looks gorgeous. So I got the end finial ring out and jewel out, but I've not been able to get the top finial jewel out of the brass fitting. So I'm soaking it in some Pensbury Manor Penetrate Potion number 7, and we'll let that sit for an hour or so, and we'll try it again, maybe a little bit of heat to try to get that loose. But now I can polish up this ring separately. And whenever I have this many small pieces, I gather them all together in a little tray like this, so I don't lose them. And now that the barrel has been soaking and brushed out and everything, I've got to just remove the last bit of latex diaphragm that's in right there. So I use my dental scraper to tease all that material out. There, I got most of that old desiccated diaphragm from the inside of that barrel, and now it's looking pretty clean all the way around. You have to be careful when you're scraping not to scrape off any celluloid or damage those threads. So now that beveled edge right there will have the diaphragm up against it, and press it up against the sides of the barrel to make the seal right there, and then those threads go in. So now I think the next order of business, now that that barrel is looking very nice and transparent all the way through, let's put a new diaphragm in that pump and get it back in the barrel again. So let's put this diaphragm into this vac pump and get it back in the barrel. I've got some talc, I've got my pellet pusher from the Inky Nib, and I've got my Parker Vac extractor from the Inky Nib. And the first thing I always like to do is to take my dental tool and just run it along those threads, just to make sure there's no debris in there. There's a nice clean surface. Of course, these threads came out nice and clean, so there wasn't a lot of debris in there. I've soaked this pump in pen flush for quite a while and polished up the seat right there, make sure it's clean. And it's looking very nice and shiny for 88 years old. And I polished the brass button on the end as well. So it's looking very nice. So now what we do is we put the diaphragm on the pellet pusher. It's a little bit long, so I trim a little bit off just to start, maybe a little bit more. And then we can mark it right there at that groove. There we go, we're right up against the pellet, and I can feel that groove right there. I got my X-Acto blade out and mark it at that spot right there. And then we trim it off at that mark. And that looks right. That was a clever thing of Scott to do at the Inky Nib, to put that guide there so you don't have to measure this bloody thing every time. So now we're going to put some talc on this diaphragm so it will fold back on itself, which is always a challenge. Then we're going to push the pellet into the pellet receptacle, and it's not going in. Okay, so that opening is a little bit wide. So I've seen this before in previous replacements, that people have crimped that aluminum in a little bit to hold the pellet. So I'm going to try to do that with a pair of pliers. There, and I put the pellet in and then squeeze the receptacle around it so that it's holding. Now I'll put the pellet pusher back in again, and I'm going to peel that latex back on itself. This might take a short time, this may take a long time. I can never tell. This one's going very nicely so far, he said, hoping it doesn't go south on me. I'm going to get that up on that ramp. Spoke too soon. There we go. Got to get that latex right up against that lip. Hold on to it and make sure it works. And there we go. Now we put our vac extractor back on, and we add some silicone oil, the leading edge of that diaphragm, and on these threads. Make sure those threads go into the barrel nicely, and this silicone oil will keep that diaphragm cuff from twisting as I go inside. And I'm just going to hold on to the edge here and make sure it gets past that shelf. There we go. And then we can ease the threads slowly into that barrel. Clamp down on it a little bit. We're going to run it back and forth. Feels a little bit tight. Just going to run it back and forth and get that silicone oil working. And we got to make sure that we're not twisting the diaphragm inside. There we go, hand tight, and then use our inspection camera to make sure that diaphragm is seated correctly and works. It's not twisted. So now that that pump is working properly, we can put the nib, feed, and breather tube together into the section and reinstall that part of the pen and give the nib a test. But before I install it, I'm actually going to align that nib a little bit more. So I'll put my magnifying lenses on, and it's easier to adjust a nib when it's out of the feed and section. If it needs any major adjustments, I'll get it close, then we'll put it back together into the section and check it again, and then we'll do a dip test on it. So I think I've adjusted that nib as best I can. So I'm going to put the breather tube back in the feed, very long breather tube, and we're going to get the nib and line it up properly this time with the feed, since it was misaligned to begin with. And you'll notice that I've polished up that ebonite on that feed where it's visible. We hold it top and bottom with some gripper material, and I'm just going to feel for the sweet spot because it sat in this section for 88 years. That feels like it's correct. Let's see whether I got deep enough. Yeah, it looks like it's gone deep enough. We should have good cap clearance with that. I'm going to add a little silicone oil to the section. I don't like shellacking these sections down because a little bit of silicone oil will keep any ink from spilling out, make a nice seal. There's a good amount of threads there, and the user can unscrew that section anytime and inject water with a syringe to clean this pen out. A lot easier to maintain a vintage pen when you can get at the section. So now we're going to do a dip test and check out how well that nib writes. I'm going to get out some paper and some Watermans. Now a lot of people ask me what ink is safe with vintage pens that have latex sacks and diaphragms, and I always say Waterman Serenity Blue. Not all the Watermans are safe, generally the blues. So Inspired Blue, Mysterious Blue, which is a blue-black. The Inspired Blue is a turquoise kind of color, and this Serenity Blue are all safe. But also, inks that are low in saturation and have no shimmer in them and don't have high alkalinity. So I'd stay away from Iroshizuku inks, stay away from shimmering inks, and stick with low saturation inks like Waterman Serenity Blue, Pelikan 4001 Blue, Schaefer Script Blue, and Parker Quink Blue are all readily available. Should be safe to use with your vintage pen. The main thing to do is make sure that ink doesn't stay sitting in a pen like this for more than a couple of weeks without being used. If you keep ink flowing through this, and you keep using your pen, there's no worries whatsoever. If you let it sit for a couple of weeks, even Waterman Serenity Blue is going to coagulate, thicken up, and stick inside there. So clean out the pen with clear water if you're going to leave it sit for more than a couple of weeks. Let's check this nib out. This is a 1937 Parker Vacumatic, and this is a Lockdown first gen. So immediately I can see that it's very nice and wet. It has a little bit of bounce to it, not much. It's a fairly stiff nib. There's a good amount of feedback vertically and a scratch in this direction. That's what I saw with the microscope. Now I've aligned those tines as much as I can do it, so I'll adjust them again and check under the microscope, and then once they're perfectly aligned, I'll go at it with some micro mesh, probably starting with some 8000 grit and moving up to 12,000. Okay, so the digital microscope shows that I got the tines in alignment as best as I can. And let's try the pen again. Need more ink. That's much better. Very wet and smooth with a lot of feedback. And let's check this line out. It looks to my eye like a 0.5 millimeter to a 0.6 millimeter, which is like fine to medium. Yeah, it's writing beautifully now. I think I'm going to polish out some of that feedback. Put my microphone next to it so you can hear the feedback. And then I'll go to some micro mesh. Here's some 8000 grit and a little bit of water, and go up and down 8 times. Do all the points of the compass up and down, side to side, all the way around, and then some counterclockwise circles, clockwise circles, and then figure eights, all 8 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Like doing calisthenics. And then we go to some 12,000 grit. And let's get the microphone down there again. And it's a lot less feedback. It's enough feedback for my taste. I like feeling my nib on the page, and this is just perfect for me. So apparently when I filled the pen and weighed it to check the capacity, I neglected to press record. So we're going to do this again. Weigh the pen first, and we get 12.18 grams. Press tear, remove the blind cap, unlock the lockdown, and we can dip it in the Waterman's and give it 5 or 6 full strokes until I stop hearing bubbles. And this very long breather tube and large barrel of the first generation Vacumatics take a lot of ink, so it takes a number of pumps to fill it right up. And I made a video recently that showed how the Vacumatic filling mechanism works using a Parker 51 clear demonstrator that I borrowed from Murray. So you can see that video by clicking right up there. And let's weigh the pen. And we get 2.68 milliliters of ink, which is extraordinary. Now, of course, you have to depress to lock it down. And if you press it right now, it's going to eject some ink. So I'm going to just push it once slowly down into the bottle of ink and give it a turn and weigh the pen again. We get 2.25 milliliters of ink. I filled this pen a couple of times and I've gotten anywhere from 2.25 to 2.5 milliliters of ink, depending on how much ink you expel. Again, it's a large amount of ink. Okay, now we're going to go through the micro mesh from 1500 grit right through to 12,000 grit on the barrel and the cap. I'm going to masking tape off those 3 gold bands, which are very tight. They don't slip at all, so there's not been any celluloid shrinkage of this pen.
It shrinks?
We'll do the barrel first. If the 1500 grit doesn't get any of the gouges out, I'll go after it with my trusty 4000 grit flexible sandpaper. And here's the cap and the barrel all polished up, buffed up. Went through all the micro mesh and then used some polishing compound on my buffer wheel, and it's looking gorgeous. Polished up the section as well, and I'm really pleased with how those cap bands polished up beautifully. So now all we have to do is put on the end finials and the top finials. I'm still waiting for this penetrate potion to work. I'm going to probably leave that overnight and see whether I can get that off. It's easier to put it on the top finial with a screwdriver and tighten it down and then put the end finial in. But if I can't get it out, I'm not going to damage it. I'll just screw it down with some rubber matting on the top, but we'll see tomorrow morning. I've polished up the bezel for the end cap jewel. We put that bezel on, and then we can screw down the jewel using some rubber matting. And then I'm going to give that end jewel a little bit of a polish as well, so it shines up as nicely as the barrel. So there we are, one beautiful pen. And once we get that shiny clip on, it will be complete. So here we are, it's the next morning, and I can't get that jewel to budge out of that brass nut. If you try to over torque it, you run the risk of snapping that celluloid stem off of there. So it wants to stay in there. It's going to stay in there. Feels like it's glued in there, actually. It shouldn't be. But I went ahead and polished it up, and we're going to reinstall the shiny clip, and then we'll be done. So we'll put the clip between the 2 breather holes, screw in the brass nut, and then get some gripping material. Actually, I'm going to give it a push with a pencil as well, and we'll push it down into the mat and hold the clip in place. Get it nice and tight. That's what she said.
Okay, insert rod support A into slot B.
That's
And
what...
if you say that's what she said one more time, I'm going to pop you.
And there we go. Polished up like it's brand new. 88 years old. Beautiful pen. Writes wonderfully. And I'll come back with my thoughts on this resurrection. So what are my thoughts about this pen resurrection? Well, this one was very satisfying. Not only was I able to obtain a first generation lockdown filler, but the pen also restored beautifully with only a couple of minor hiccups. And this is a perfect example of the first generation of Parker Vacumatics. The pen was designed in 1932 by designer Joseph B. Platt. He designed the Parker Aero Clip, which is still incorporated into the company's logo 93 years later. Platt also went on to design film sets in Hollywood, designing such famous productions as Selznick's Gone with the Wind in 1939, Hitchcock's Rebecca in 1940, and Hitchcock's The Paradigm Case in 1947. The first generation of the Parker Vacumatic was a true innovation. First called the Golden Arrow and then Vacuum Filler, finally they settled on the name of Vacumatic. And the new pump system was truly unique and allowed the pen to use the inside of the barrel as an ink reservoir with a capacity, as you see here with this one, of around 2.5 milliliters of ink. And you can see your ink levels through the translucent stacked celluloid. I'm fond of all three generations of Vacumatics, but I think they evolved lower rather than higher in later generations. The Speedline filler reduced the barrel ink capacity and replaced the classic Arrow with the Parker Split Arrow Clip that would continue through to the Parker 51. The post-war third generation replaced most of the metal parts of the pump with celluloid, and although there are examples of double-jeweled third-generation Vacumatics, they are relatively rare, as the blind cap was rounded off in Generation 3. Many of the first-generation Vacumatics that were colored stacked celluloid carried the colored celluloid to the section and the top and bottom jewels, making it a very pretty pen. I restored a couple of those, a burgundy pearl and a emerald pearl, I believe. The first generation of the Vacumatic is the ultimate in my estimation. It's solidly constructed, well designed and manufactured. This pen is 88 years old. I challenge you to find anything made 88 years ago to be this sturdy and usable. Hell, pens made 2 years ago fall apart in your hands. They truly don't make them like they used to. And this is such a beautiful pen, I'm hesitant to part with it. I still have my trusty 1945 Parker Vacumatic in azure blue pearl with the custom ground stub nib and the modern brass pump, and I write with this pen constantly. So this beauty must go. But it won't be cheap, folks. In order to part with this pen, I'll have to get $220 US plus shipping. If you're interested in having a classic piece of fountain pen history that works and writes beautifully and holds a whopping 2.5 milliliters of ink, send me an email at inkquiringminds@gmail.com with your name and your address, and I'll send you a shipping quote as well as instructions on how to pay my PayPal. And there you have it. If you like this video, please like and subscribe, and don't forget to ring that bell to get instant notifications whenever a new video is posted. And you can join as a member of my channel for only 99 cents a month, and I guarantee I'll answer your comments in the comment section, and you'll get cool emojis, badges, sneak peek unboxing videos, as well as instant access to my videos the moment I post them. And that just leaves it for me to say, thank you for watching. And that's all she wrote.
I made this.